Sonia, I don't think we can, I cannot hear you. Okay, others either. I thought it was just me. Maybe you should check your audio settings.
Hello, Sonia, can you hear me? Yes, you can hear me. Okay, can you take your arrow and go to the bottom left corner of your Zoom? Yes, you are unmuted, but there is a little arrow going upward. Do you see it? Yes.
Audio settings.
Oh, excellent. No, we can. I don't know what you did, but it works. Very good. Off you go. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Everybody can hear me? Okay. Sorry about that. I don't know what went wrong here, but this is an online event and everything which can go wrong will go wrong. But very warmly welcome to this session in Imagine 4/7, where we have some lovely people lined up for you. So please seat yourself very comfortably, and we will serve you a plate of global citizenship education at its best. I have an agenda somewhere here, and by magic, it just came on my screen. And here you can see what we have lined up for you. First 10 minutes, that is obviously me speaking. I think I have already spent 3 of those minutes. And in the next 20 minutes, Vanessa Andreotti will give you a sort of journey through year 2048, where you will be invited to imagine what would happen if nobody took all these crises seriously that we are up against now, including climate, inequality, racial, etc., etc. After that, there will be a session of 10 minutes where you will be asked for some questions and will be given instructions for breakout groups. And you will be invited to discuss questions in these breakout groups in about 20 minutes. And then we will have a short break. And in that break, you can either keep on reflecting what has happened, or you can grab a cup of coffee or go and stretch your body in the way that you needed it, that's necessary for you. And after we come back, then there will be some group sharing. And then we have co-sensing with radical tenderness and the closing circle. And I would like to present the facilitators for this session. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So I see that what Vanessa is already on the screen. Welcome, Vanessa. Lovely to see you there. Vanessa Andreotti is a professor at the Department of Educational Studies at University of British Columbia, and she has a research chair in race, inequalities, and global change. Vanessa has published a great number of publications on critical global citizenship education and a lot of other themes. And she has been a very active trainer with the Bridge 47, where she has participated in transformative learning journey, as well as other courses. Do we have René Sousa also with us? Yes, hello René, welcome. Lovely to see you again. René Sousa is a postdoc in educational studies, also at the University of British Columbia. He has published widely on global citizenship education, and he has been used in Bridge 47 trainings, including Transformative Learning Journey. And René has also written a lot of publication, and including one, I think, or maybe it's two for Bridge 47. One is on mapping of experiments and debates of current debates of global citizenship education. And last but not least, we have Danny D'Emilia. Are you with us? Hello, nice to see you. Danny D'Emilia is a trans feminist artist and educator working in the fields of performance and visual art, devised theater, radical pedagogy, and social justice. He's very interested in embodied political affective practices that merge artistic, activist, and spiritual realms, and have been developing a vast body of work around the concept, practice of radical tenderness that we are about to experience. All three of our facilitators are part of Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures Collective, which is a collective of researchers, artists, and educators which share and create collaborations around different kinds of artistic, pedagogical, cartographic, and relational experiments that aim to identify and deactivate colonial habits of being and to gesture towards the possibility of decolonial futures. So I wish you very warm welcome, and over to you, René, Vanessa, and Danny.
So thank you so much, Sonia, for the presentation and the introduction. And thank you everyone for being here. My name is Vanessa Andreotti. I'm speaking from the unceded lands of the Musqueam people, where my university is located. We're actually on the reserve, on the indigenous reserve where we live. And it's important to also acknowledge the land that we are speaking from the perspective of the land itself as a being, as an entity that is conscious and that sustains us and that we're part of. Would like to also say thank you to Bridge 47 that has actually supported a lot of the work that we do in terms of offering spaces for experiments. Our collective is very much committed to doing experiments in a kind of education that we call depth education, that is different from the education that we are normally used to. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about that before we start the experiment. Otherwise, the experiment doesn't work. So the Educational 2048 experiment that we're going to be doing right now. So I'll just share my screen a little bit. The other thing is that we also shifted the program a little bit to put everything in the beginning, send you into the groups, and then come back for a conversation, because we feel that the radical tenderness part of the exercise is much better closer to the experiment because of the depth education that we're going to be talking about for a bit. So I'll just share with you my screen. Just a minute, because I don't know if it's showing the right screen. I think that's it now. I hope you can see it. So as Sonia mentioned, GTDF, the Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures Collective, is a transdisciplinary collective of researchers, artists, educators, students, and indigenous knowledge keepers. It works at the interface of questions related to historical, systemic, and ongoing violence, and questions related to the unsustainability of our current habits of being. And this is important because generally, in my experience as an educator, in academic, you have groups that work with historical, systemic, and ongoing violence generally do not touch questions of unsustainability to a great extent. And groups working with unsustainability, questions of climate change, for example, or climate crisis, do not work with questions of historical, systemic, and ongoing violence. The climate justice movement is trying to bridge the two, but we are trying to do that also in a different way. So we bring together concerns related to racism, to colonialism, to unsustainability, to climate change, to biodiversity loss, to economic instability, mental health crisis, and the intensifications of social and ecological violence. So the themes that we work with are really heavy, heavy themes, and we try to create pedagogical containers that are lighter so that we can hold space and be present to difficult and painful issues without relationships falling apart and without feeling overwhelmed or immobilized or wanting to be rescued from the discomfort. So this requires a very different kind of education that, and for that, to explain that, we make a distinction between mastery education, which is probably the education that we have been exposed to in schools, and depth education, which is the kind of education we are trying to understand and experiment with. So mastery education is this idea of putting content in a cup, and it can take different forms. Sometimes it's also about allowing the students to fill their own cups, but it either centers the teacher, or it centers the content, or it centers the student. The kind of education that we're talking about, instead of being pouring things in a cup, it's about an onion, peeling an onion and seeing its layers. So it doesn't center the teacher or the content or the students. It centers the world itself and how we relate to the world. Now, if we think about master education with the second picture in each of the comparisons, master education is about empowering people to maybe climb a peak and arrive at a space where they feel confident and empowered, whereas depth education is about, probably the best analogy would be to dive deep into a freezing ocean without an oxygen tank to discover that you are both the water and all the pollution that we ourselves have put in the water. We are everything that is in that water. So it's different. It's a very different experience from mastery education to depth education. And one of the issues that we have when we're presenting these experiments to other people is to say that it's very counterintuitive. It doesn't go where you want it to go, but it does something else to you that later, only after the exercise, that you are able to see. But it cannot be explained in advance what it will do to you, to your relationship with yourself, and to your relationship with the world. You have to experience it. So in that spirit, what I can say to you, what depth education tries to do, and I'm going to try to explain, but I don't know if it's possible to do this explanation before this exercise, is that we're trying to help people to walk a tightrope between naive hope and desolate hopelessness, because we feel that both of them are problematic. So naive hope is when we want the right answer, the right ideology, or a heroic authority, or the chosen people, or a special practice, or a return to a place and time to hold on to, because we need hope in the future, right? That's the idea of naive hope. Desolate hopelessness is when we let go of the naive hope, and then we find ourselves in misanthropy, nihilism, banalization of brutality, immobilization, everything goes, in hedonism. So we're saying that both of them are problematic. We need to learn to walk the tightrope with relational rigor and with rational rigor. But the most important thing is that we need to learn to walk this tightrope with humility, humor, hyper self-reflexivity. And we have added now honesty as well. So it's honesty, humility, humor, and hyper self-reflexivity. So depth education is about learning to walk that tightrope and building the stamina to sit with difficult and painful things together without relationships falling apart. So the Education 2048 thought experiment is an education that invites you to do that. So I have to explain it a little bit before we go into that. So unlike mastery education approaches, this depth education experiment is not trying to impart content or to offer a specific teleology or a point of arrival that we should all agree with. It's not trying to convince you of anything. The exercise is neither descriptive or prescriptive. Instead, it intends to clear the space and build collective capacity for us to reflect on the role of education in confronting the potential or likelihood of social and ecological collapse in our lifetime or beyond. So the exercise invites you to observe the parts of you that desire to relate to this experiment through logic. So focusing on the accuracy of descriptions, the feasibility of prescriptions presented in the exercise. Also the parts of you that desire to relate to the experiment through creativity, focusing on the artistic license that we took in the movement of the metaphors. It also invites you to look at the parts of you that want to relate to the experiment through the body, focusing on the physical sensations and the affective responses that you have, or the parts of you who experience the exercise as a mixture of these modes of relating, or others that may emerge. In other words, the exercise invites you to zoom out from yourself, taking a step away from your own opinions and to observe yourself observing with curiosity without investing emotionally in the reactions or resistances that may emerge towards the exercise. So because depth education is based on a non-Western form of psychoanalysis, it really invites you to see your own layers as an onion. We also talk about a bus. Imagine there's a bus of people within you, and there are people at the front, at the back, and in the middle, there's a driver. And pay attention to what's happening on your bus as you go through the exercise. And remember that if you do not have the stamina to sit with the complexity of what's happening within you, there's no chance you're going to have the stamina to sit with the complexity that is happening around you. And if you don't have that stamina, you will tend to project your own ideas and your own ideals, both inside yourself and towards others. And in that, our relationships are compromised, and our possibility to work together generatively is also compromised. So with that, I will invite Renée to start the experiment.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. We shall begin. Imagine today is 10th of December 2048 and you are participating in a 3D virtual reality world Skype call with the intent to decide how we should educate our children and ourselves after the devastating impact of the events of the past 30 years, which were caused by human greed, arrogance, stubbornness, and unwillingness to learn from human wrongs. For our consultation, it is important that we remember A. What education is for, B. What the past has taught us, C. What made a difference to get us out of the mess, D. What we know now, and E. What we are still being taught. We will review this together before starting our consultation. There are 1 billion people on this call, a third of the world's population today. We will start by recalling significant events that happened in the last 3 decades. What you will see next is the text of this presentation only. The associated images and videos are now being transferred to your body implants. Please blink twice to accept the transmission.
The period between 2018 and 2027 was marked by an interruption of our dreams as prosperity, as consumerism. This period started with school climate strikes. Young people seemed to be aware that the path we had chosen was both violent and unsustainable. They already knew that their generation would not have the same opportunities for social mobility that their parents and grandparents enjoyed, nor the stability and well-being afforded by the class in relatively healthy ecosystems. In 2020, the COVID-19 global pandemic hit, followed by several outbreaks of different strains of the virus. Racial tensions and civil unrest also marked this period, especially in highly divided and volatile countries like Brazil, Hong Kong, UK, and the USA. From 2022, we had a mounting economic crisis, mass unemployment, mass homelessness, mass migration, localized famines, and the intensification of social and racial inequalities. Reactionary populist governments were democratically elected all over the world by harnessing the power of hyper-political polarization and fueling antagonism and resentment. Extreme weather, flooding, and catastrophic forest fires became routine. Pollinator populations collapsed globally in 2026. By 2027, alpine skiing was only possible in the Himalayas. In this 10-year period, schools became even more obvious sites of political and economic struggle. Governments in many countries, including the USA and the UK, forbade teachers to talk about racial privilege or the complexities of gender and sexual identities. Teachers were also prohibited to present anti-capitalist perspectives or perspectives that challenged accounts of history authorized by the state. However, despite political disputes, the protection of unrealistic economic interests was still prioritized in the curriculum. At large, schools were still teaching a learner-centered, competencies-based, technology, and market-oriented curriculum driven by hyper-individualistic metropolitan consumerist values and principles. By this time, curriculum examination and school social services had largely been outsourced to private companies. In 2026, a well-known corporation in the US that had been lobbying the government for decades offered a more cost-effective option for online global education and teacher training. They standardized a global curriculum powered by artificial intelligence, causing mass teacher unemployment. The period between 2028 and 2037 was marked by the real threat of human extinction. By 2028, Amazon forest was down to a third of its size. The remainder teetered on the edge of becoming a biologically inert desert, similar to the exhausted agricultural fields of the US Corn Belt. Ironically, the market share of Jeff Bezos' Amazon company was worth a third of the global wealth. The average temperature rose 2.47 degrees Celsius across the globe. Previous mitigation efforts had been too little, too late. All permanent ice in the Arctic was lost. All permafrost in Siberia melted, releasing methane and unleashing viruses and fungal strains that we were not immune to or prepared to. We had extensively desertification that led to massive crop failures that in turn caused the global food supply chain to break down. This resulted in the worst global famine ever experienced. There were also disastrous typhoons, hurricanes, and tsunamis, making large areas uninhabitable. Many people were displaced. Borders were closed and militarized because of mass migration. Most states failed to sustain their welfare safety net, and many people were left without any government support or healthcare, sanitation, or waste management. Pensions and unemployment benefits also became a thing of the past as systems of wage labor foundered, and mid-human range, future forecasting had become impossible. Reactionary dictatorships were installed. Governments used mass surveillance and AI technology, wrapped in the rhetoric of maintaining law and order, to sweep away civil rights and freedoms and control citizen mobility. Torture and genocide against people in groups perceived as inconvenient increased at an alarming rate and became a normalized extension of police and military tactics. Nuclear and biological weapons were unleashed in wars. 5 factors contributed to the unparalleled loss of human life during this time. 1. Unprecedented famines. 2. Major viral and fungal outbreaks. 3. A global mental health crisis. 4. Incurable new diseases caused by combined toxins and microplastics in food and water. 5. Violent civil conflicts, including state-sanctioned violence, terrorism, and police brutality. Needless to say that Black, Indigenous, and racialized populations were disproportionately targeted by state-sponsored violence and suffered the most in these events due to unparalleled levels of inequality. It is important to acknowledge that many of these people and communities had been experiencing these levels of trauma for generations, and that had been sounding the alarm for ages, because most of us were indifferent and focused on trying to sustain our way of life in spite of all evidence that it was deadly. Online schooling became unviable in 2033, and the corporation that had taken over global online learning went bankrupt in 2034, although the C-suite executives received very generous payouts, bonuses, and severance packages prior to dissolution. The global economy completely collapsed in 2036, a year after Elon Musk started a human colony in Mars. Between 2038 and 2047, we finally accepted that we were part of the problem and that we needed to get our act together, grow up, and engage with our messy and painful reality to avoid being wiped out. The Mars colony tragically failed in 2038, destroying our hopes for lives on another planet. In 2039, a massive event made us all suddenly realize that we had messed up big time. We realized that we were addicted to arrogance, consumption, unaccountable autonomy, and control. We realized that we needed mass rehabilitation. We grasped the gravity of the fact that we were only 3 billion people left on the planet. We understood that we had caused the extinction of 70% of all species and the extinction of all life in whole parts of the earth. And we were extremely close to causing our own. We recognized that planet Earth is alive and we are part of its metabolism, not the center of the world or a special species. We also worked out that humanity is capable of both horrendous and wonderful things. We started to face our own and others' humanity in all its complexities, and to be taught by the human wrongs we had inflicted upon each other, upon other beings, and upon the planet. Then we all had to learn quickly, collectively, and without schools or moral manifestos. We had to learn to heal intellectually, emotionally, relationally, economically, ecologically, and politically. We had to learn to abolish colonial and racial violence, inequality, hierarchies of worth and separations, to center the earth and decenter our egos, identities, human narratives, and projections, to age and to die in generative ways. We had to learn to care for everything and everyone rather than compete, to plant, to repurpose technology, to compost, to repair, and to regenerate everything, to prioritize the common good for humans, non-humans, and the planet, to use words and conversation carefully and wisely, with humility and maturity. We had to learn to own up, to sober up, to clean up, to grow up, to show up, and to exist differently.
So today, 10th of December 2048, we convene to decide how to educate our children for human responsibility, considering the needs of the next 7 generations of humans and non-humans alike. We need our children to learn from human wrongs, from the violence and unsustainability caused by humanity, from our repeated mistakes of the past so that they can only make different mistakes in their future. From the day children are born, their education should prepare them to become healthy and wise elders and good ancestors for all relations. We cannot afford to repeat history. Today, we decide how to do this together, as a planet-wide human and non-human family.
So this is the end of the scenario, but there are still, as part of the exercise, a few things that come with it in terms of depth education. So there are two types of sets of questions. The first set of questions is related to the scenario itself. So we invite you to be thinking about, what do you think was the event that made us realize we needed another way to coexist? Who were the people who survived? Who perished? Why? What was rehab like? What did we fail to learn up to 2018 that could have prevented the most harmful events of the next 2 decades? We also ask diving deeper questions that are more psychoanalytic. So, for example, what effective responses emerged during this exercise? Anxiety, sadness, resistance, relief, exhaustion, excitement, hope, hopelessness, anger, frustration, defensiveness, loss, grief, something else, something not articulable, a mixture of everything. The second thing is that we say that the collapse described in the scenario has already happened for many people and other species, and it's still happening as we speak. In many cases, the collapse they face on a daily basis is what maintains the comforts, the enjoyments, the securities and conveniences of those of us who have so far been protected from it. How do you relate to your own complicity in violence and unsustainability? And what sensations emerge in your body when you have to reflect on this? Then number 3, did you witness a desire for hope in the continuity of our current systems and reassurance that everything would be okay? And then think about why. Why is that desire there, and how that desire can actually prevent us from talking about difficult and painful things. So I will show you also one thing that we have done in the project, which was to look at different responses from educators. And as we do this exercise with other educators, we find it's helpful to show it now rather than later. So we have a first cluster of responses to this exercise, which is a cluster of relief. We mapped 4 clusters. So cluster 1 is about relief with the articulation of the catastrophic unfolding of events. Then some anger at our collective inability to see this already happening. Then there's some excitement that we're finally talking about it, and skepticism in relation to the awakening presented as a conclusion. People have said this is going to be impossible to happen, which was interesting for us. Cluster 2 is, the responses in cluster 2 are about surprise with the exercise, some anxiety with the unfolding of the catastrophe, hope with the conclusion, and concern for the length of time it could take for solutions to be found. Then cluster 3 is a cluster of resistance. It's resistance to the exercise itself, sometimes even opposition to the existence of the exercise, fear of the hopeless caused by the exercise, some level of despair with the scenario, people feeling overwhelmed with the complexity of the situation, and some level of denial. So people say, like, this is, it has nothing to do with me, denial of complicity in the problems presented. Then there's cluster 4, which we find the most interesting, which is a cluster of bewilderment at the scale of the problem, some disorientation and disidentification with one's own priorities, so a loss of satisfaction with familiar frames, an unease with leaving this open, coupled with a motivation to keep working through the complexities, the sense of feeling ill-equipped to take the next steps, but not feeling immobilized, and feelings described as open heart surgery and lead ball in the stomach. So as we move to the second part of the experiment, the conclusion of the exercise offers us some questions about education, especially about global citizenship education and global education. The first question is, could education as we know it equip humanity to hold space for difficult, painful, overwhelming, irritating issues and conversations, away from desires to be rescued or coddled, and without demanding quick fixes? Could education as we know it be reoriented away from metropolitan consumerist individualism? Could education as we know it prepare us to show up with maturity, sobriety, humility, and accountability as we face storms together without hurting or killing each other or further harming or fully destroying the planet and other non-human beings? And could education as we know it equip us to face the potential or likelihood of the end of the world as we know it? Or do we need something else? So with these questions, I will invite you to take a break first, and then go into your breakout rooms. We'll have just to recalculate a little bit the timing that we have for this. I suggest that we have 15 minutes of a break so that you can sit with the questions, sit with the exercise. And in the breakout rooms, we're going to go back. There are different things you can do. And we will ask you to speak to the questions or the parts of the exercise that created a movement on your bus, right? Or that created movements that surprised you within you, and share that with your group, and then in the groups we're going to stay probably for another 15 to 20 minutes, and then we come back to do an exercise called radical tenderness. This exercise was created originally by Dani D'Emilia with an artistic partner, and we have recently recreated this exercise in the context of the Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures Collective. And we use this exercise to wrap up the workshop and to actually help people to get themselves back together, because we know that the exercise sometimes is a bit discombobulating for people. And this exercise actually helps us go back to a space where we can generatively engage with what's going on in the exercise and in the world. So I invite you to take a break now for 15 minutes. We will come back at, I don't know what time it is for you, but 15 minutes here would be 22 past the hour. Okay? So we're back here 22 past the hour, and then you're going to be divided into the breakout rooms. You're going to be sent to breakout rooms. Is that okay, Sonia?
That's very much okay. Thank you very much for being such a good timekeeper.
Thank you, Sonia. Okay, so I'll see you in 15 minutes.
See you. Hello and welcome back.
Hi, Sonia, we can't hear you.
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Yes? Maybe it's Vanessa.
I'm sorry. Okay, so sorry. I think you are going to be in groups of 5 or 6. Renee, myself, and Dani will not be in the groups. And so there's 2 things to sit with here. One is your own responses and what's happening in relation to your what's happening on your bus, observing what movements are happening internally. But then the other question also is about education, like what kind of education can prepare us to face together the things that are happening in the world with sobriety, maturity, discernment, and accountability. So I think it's Damien who's going to divide you into groups, and if correct me if I'm wrong, Sonia, it's 20 minutes in the breakout groups. Then we're coming back for questions and answers. And then we just need to leave 20 minutes at the end for the radical tenderness exercise.
Yes, please.
So passing
Okay,
it to
perfect.
Damien.
Yes, I'll send you over.